Right. What is this computer tweaking on?
Than conducting oversight, but that is predicated on Congress taking that oversight duty seriously, irrespective of who is in charge of the other two branches. And so I think there's a political will issue there with oversight, but also there are some mechanical issues. So Congress could do a better job of holding hearings that are a bit more bipartisan, a bit more focused on the facts as opposed to the sizzle of a given anecdote or scandal. I mean, really trying to get at root causes and really trying to take hard, deep looks at the underlying structural reasons why things like fraud happen. It's not as sexy. It's not going to get you as many views on social media, but it's going to actually ideally lead to long-term, sustainable, durable reforms that can really crack down on the problem.
Thank you. And so the short-lived Doge office was supposed to cut fraud. Mr. Hetler-Gaudette, what did it actually do, and how did its actions actually affect everyday Americans?
So Doge was a complete failure. Even on its own terms, the primary progenitor of Doge claimed that he was going to find $2 trillion. Then he moved that down to $1 trillion in waste, fraud, and abuse, cut spending. But in 2025, we actually spent more money than we spent in 2024. At the opening of this fiscal year in October, we ran the largest opening month budget deficit ever run before at $285 billion. We have hollowed out the key functions of a bunch of agencies. So any claim that DOGE was effective either on cutting spending or promoting effectiveness or efficiency are just flat out undermined and undercut by the facts.
And Mr. Hetler-Gaudette, because you have done investigations yourself, did you do any follow-up on Mr. Shirley's video?
So personally, I took a look at some of what had been done to try and backstop what Mr. Shirley indicated in his video by professional journalists at CBS, like practitioners like the Inspector General in Minnesota. And as it turns out, they had a difficult time substantiating what Mr. Shirley was claiming to be true in his video. And in fact, they found countervailing evidence, including having been provided security footage by one of those daycares of children being dropped off the very day that Mr. Shirley was supposedly there. So I think in my view, I would have to, I'd err on the side of believing the professional journalist at CBS and the professional oversight practitioners at the Inspector General office.
Thank you. I'm out of time. I yield.
Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so on that note, I think it's important that we return to a discussion of how these investigations were conducted and the type of evidence that led to the discovery of this massive fraud. One thing that is clear based on the testimony today is that this is not just a Minnesota problem. This is a warning sign for every state that it is administering large-scale programs using taxpayer dollars. And we need to get to the bottom of how to identify this type of fraud and prevent it from continuing to. Mr. Dexter, I'd like to go back to your testimony, both what you have shared with us already about your extensive background investigating and analyzing program fraud and the methods that you used to identify the theft of taxpayer dollars in this particular type of case. In your written testimony, you mentioned that case selection and investigations were begun in part by looking at funding data. And I am interested in how your office would use things like funding data, use statistics, and other information and evidence to begin to develop these cases.
Well, it wasn't hard to find the funding amounts. We looked at the centers that received CCAP funds, and then we listed them out. We had what was originally referred to as the top 100 list, and it was based off of centers receiving the most CCAP funding, and that was generated through the billing process and the people that administer the funds.
And when you looked at that list, Did it turn out that there were certain facilities that were outliers in some way?
Yeah.
Either because they were receiving a larger amount of funding based on student.
Yeah, somebody sent that to me. So what's up? We got pictures and I mean, they pretty much got all the proof of what happened to her up there. Her hair getting pulled down, and she got a big ass bite mark on her arm and this and that. I guess she had what the post up say she pressed the charges or whatever to who did that to her. You come here talking about how about them bells? You think that shit funny?
Or because of where they were located. Tell us how you identified which
You think that's
facilities
funny?
warranted further review.
Well, when we started looking at the centers that were receiving the most funds, the investigators were each assigned cases, were assigned centers, and we first started looking into what the billing pattern was, or what the billing amount was, how many children were being billed at these centers, and we would have centers that were billing for 120 plus children. And looking at the different days and times, kind of establishing a pattern that just was outside the realm of a typical daycare center.
So in other words, you used objective data and evidence as the foundation to proceed further with your investigations.
Yes, in order to start the investigation, that's what we would begin with.
And in your experience, wouldn't you also say that that is the typical method or atypical method for beginning and analyzing a potential fraud case of any nature in any community?
Yes, because in order to do the investigation, you first have to find out if it warrants an investigation and to what extent that investigation would be.
And now, isn't it also correct? You mentioned in your testimony systemic weaknesses that allowed the large-scale fraud, even after you had developed substantial evidence that there was, in fact, fraud occurring, that there were institutional and systemic barriers that prevented you from successfully to retire because the process had become so constrained that meaningful work was no longer possible. Tell us about the barriers and ultimately found frustration that led you to retire.
Well, when we were originally hired, when this unit was originally created and we were hired with the understanding that our job was going to be to investigate fraud and stop it. And as we proceeded through with that, it wasn't by our doing that it turned out that the centers we investigated were predominantly Somali. But once that was kind of brought out to light, the roadblocks that were put in front of us, being called racist, being called before these boards to be investigated, and basically it wound up turning us into auditors. We wound up just simply reviewing attendance records and matching them up with billing. There really wasn't a lot of substantial investigation anymore, and most of our cases wound up going before administrative hearings rather than criminal.
Which in the end allowed this pattern of conduct to continue to occur, did it not?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields. Chair recognizes now the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Knott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To my colleague from Florida, thank you for that line of question. I'm going to pick up where she left off. In regards to the testimony that we've heard today, the other side of the aisle makes us believe, or wants us to believe, that the fraud has been effectively stopped, that they aggressively pursued it, they prosecuted it, and that it is under control. Is that your interpretation of where we are, Mr. Dexter?
I believe the fraud is still going on. I don't think anything has changed from what I've seen with Mr. Shirley's videos. I'm seeing in his videos the exact same things that we were seeing back from 2014 to 2019 when I worked there.
And it's astounding to me when I was looking at some of the footage, the evidence, there was almost a sense of that we're stealing. How dare you investigate us? Did you ever encounter that type of attitude when you were performing these investigations?
There was. We were taking away their money and that it wasn't fair to them.
Investigations, sir, was the fraud as obvious as it seems to me that it appeared in the videos and the other evidence that I've reviewed?
Yes, as a matter of fact, when we would go out to do our investigations, one of the things that we would have to do, or I have to do, is we would scout out a location for our surveillance cameras that allowed us direct line of sight to the centers, all their accesses. A lot of that because of the location where we were in these
Man,
industrial, commercial areas.
when I was looking to this at first, they was asking Nick questions directly. I don't know who the hell they talking to now, man. Let me see, I got
Meant we had to
something
go
else I
to
wanna-
businesses
Yeah.
and ask them permission.
Right, pick
And the
that
number
next
one
one.
comment they made was,
'Cause I just
oh, you mean
wanna-
that daycare center over there where there's no children?
Hold on.
So everyone else around it saw it.
In regards to your investigation, sir, I'm assuming that you did not just investigate daycare fraud. What other types of fraud did you investigate?
What other
No,
type of fraud?
our function was strictly childcare fraud,
Okay.
but some of that overlapped into, even though we didn't investigate it, a lot of it was also tied into the medical transportation.
Investigate single entities that were appearing as though they were committing fraud in multiple avenues.
Hold on.
I'm sorry, can you say?
So it was like
What's going on, bro?
one facility that was a daycare. It was also associated with the medical transport. Were the people who were double dipping in the fraud in your investigations?
Not that we saw as far as different organizations, but there were where one daycare center owner owned multiple daycare centers. So what we saw was more within the daycare center.
Yep. Ms. Larson, thank you for being here. I echo my colleague's sentiment from how rigorous were they?
Very. They'd be there for hours, come in and say,